I never imagined I'd find out Christmas was canceled for me by way of a text buried between pharmacy reminders, my mother's cheery invitation to a family dinner at my brother's house, except I wasn't invited. I'm 50, a paramedic in Cleveland, Ohio, and I've spent more holiday mornings scrambling to save strangers' lives than survive my own broken family rituals. The twist hit me before noon. The very people who wiped my name off the holiday card list were hosting a clandestine Christmas Eve feast with my ex-fiancée and my brother. I saw the Instagram story, a dinner table crowned with my mother's mashed potatoes and her favorite Frank Sinatra playlist, the one I'd loaned her on the old vinyl. There she was, smiling beside Eric while I was scrolling through 911 dispatch codes. I remember the thrift store's Santa mug on the counter, chipped at the rim, my mother's gift to me last year. It sits on my shelf now, collecting dust like my regrets. Did I ever tell them I gave up on marriage because I couldn't afford the rings, or that I almost walked away from paramedicine after the accident in Detroit 2 winters ago? No, I just showed up for shifts and holidays alike, believing family meant showing up. Admitting I hurt feels like smearing my own face with old Christmas pudding, sticky and humiliating. I replayed how I'd convinced myself they were just busy, or that it was my own fault for not climbing the corporate ladder like Eric. Maybe if I'd been more successful, as they'd whispered to each other, I'd still have a seat at that festive table. But while they carved the turkey in my absence, I loaded my ambulance with medical kits. I spent December 24th saving strangers from heart attacks and frostbite instead of enduring their hypocrisy. In a faint glow of flashing lights, I found something I hadn't felt in years: control. That evening, I parked my rig by the Cuyahoga River's frozen edge near Tremont, its water dark and restless beneath the cracked ice. I watched my breath fog the air, wondering why the sight of moving water used to calm me, and now only reminded me of all the ways I kept myself bottled up, like that chipped Santa mug, full of bitter coffee and unanswered questions. I admit I felt cowardly as I scrolled through their snapshots. The way my mother slipped her hand in Eric's, how my ex-fiancée laughed at some shared joke about my dead-end life. I recognized the expression. They were performing happiness, a family pageant with me conspicuously left out. My heart pinched, not with anger, but with that stubborn ache of a son who believed love was unconditional. I replayed every holiday I'd compromised. The time I stayed late at the firehouse in Lakewood because I was on call, the insurance papers I never filed after Dad's bypass operation, telling myself I was too busy to mess up a perfect family Christmas. All lies. I was afraid of disappointing them and telling them the truth. My debts, my doubts, my failure to save that man in Detroit felt like admitting my soul was broken. In the ambulance's glow, I realized I'd been saving everyone else while letting my own life hemorrhage. I told dispatch I wasn't available for family emergencies tonight. My hands trembled as I slid that final button. Maybe for once, I'd choose me. I woke up on December 25th to the distant wail of sirens instead of carols. At 6 a.m., I found myself back at Station 12 in Ohio City, leaning against the stainless steel counter where I'd once spilled my first cup of coffee as a rookie. My phone lit up with a dozen missed calls, Mom's name blinking like an unwelcome echo. I listened to her voicemail, her voice caught between apology and indignation, as if she forgot she'd never even told me about the dinner. She tried to explain that Christmas was too stressful, that I'd made things awkward by complaining about Eric's promotion, but she couldn't answer why I was the only one left in the cold. I admit I felt the old tug of guilt, wondering if I'd overreacted, if I'd been too proud. I picture that chipped mug again, this time filled with steaming hot cocoa. It's cracked like a fault line in my heart. But then I thought of the way they toasted with my ex-fiancée, their quiet laughter over my back. So I drafted one line in reply. I heard you. Then I deleted it. I blocked every number except Dad's, because he'd always called me by my childhood nickname, even when I arrested his coastline heart attack last spring. Even when I didn't answer, I wanted him to know I'd left the door ajar. By noon, I was back on a run, hauling a hypothermic teenager off the West Side Market loading dock. Her shivers reminded me that life doesn't pause for family drama. In her glassy stare, I found something both terrifying and liberating. The truth that I could save her without needing anyone else to save me. By late afternoon, I found myself parked on Superior Avenue, the storefronts of downtown Cleveland illuminated in holiday lights I didn't feel. A single red ornament hung crookedly from a bare-branch street tree, like my own life, dangling by a thread. I reached into my coat pocket and fingered the chipped Santa, a mug keychain my sister gave me one Christmas in Little Italy, the one I never wrote her a thank you note for. It felt heavier than any medical kit I'd ever carried. I admit there was a sting of envy when I saw shadowy figures dining behind Frostbar's frosted windows. My family, surely, raising glasses I would never know the taste of. I picture my mother praising Eric's latest promotion in marketing, my brother congratulating my ex-fiancée on her new success. Words flung like snowballs to bury me under their expectations. I remember the time I couldn't afford her engagement ring and promised myself I'd prove my worth someday. Proof, it turned out, was never enough. I scribbled a note on the edge of my dispatch log. I choose to heal myself. Then I tore it out and tucked it into the mug keychain's chipped edge, like a secret vow. This small act, almost absurd, felt revolutionary. I was no longer waiting for their validation. I would brew my own coffee, ringless but unbroken. On my last call before shift's end, I went alone to a nursing home on East 30th Street. The old woman on the top floor, her name tag read Ruth, had pneumonia and a family that never visited. She clasped my hand so tightly, I thought her bones would shatter. As I helped her into a wheelchair, she murmured something about Christmas being overrated unless you're with people who remember you. I couldn't tell if it was anger or truth, but it burned into me more than any reprimand from dispatch. In that moment, I felt the weight of all the abandoned traditions I'd carried and decided to shed them like a cracked mug shell. I promised Ruth I'd call her next week. It was the first promise neither gasped out of obligation nor asked for forgiveness. It was just mine. When the sirens quieted and the station lights dimmed, I walked back to my rig with the Santa keychain in one hand and a renewed pulse in my chest. The sky over Cleveland was bruised purple, and for the first time in years, I felt a kind of peace beneath the weight of that crooked ornament. I spent the late evening at home in Cleveland Heights, the heat lamp over my apartment's mini kitchen humming like an exhausted confidant. I poured myself a mug of black coffee. No festive blends, just bitter fuel, and slid the chipped Santa keychain onto my dresser as a reminder of how easily I'd let others define my worth. The neon glow of a open 24 hours diner sign flickered through the blinds, and I realized I hadn't felt this alone since that Christmas 3 years ago when I almost quit the service after losing that crew chief in Detroit. Confession. I worried I was becoming the cliché of the lonely paramedic, too busy saving strangers to save himself. I scrawled a promise on my hand. No more disappearing, and rubbed it off seconds later, too shy to hold myself to yet another vow. I remembered the first time I'd met my ex-fiancée at a diner in Tremont, how we'd traded dreams over greasy omelets. I believed, then, that two broken people could piece themselves into something whole. I was wrong. But tonight, I didn't want to piece myself back for anyone else. I wanted to find a reason to stay intact. I dug out a dusty box of Christmas cards from my childhood, handwritten notes from junior high, each one a fragment of who I'd been before disappointment taught me to keep my mouth shut. I picked a card with a cartoon snowman and taped it above my bed. It wasn't grand, but it winked at me every time I climbed into the creaking mattress and reminded me that once I had dared to hope. By midnight, I watched a grainy Christmas marathon on cable while journaling on the back of my dispatch logs. I listed 3 things I'd done this week that didn't involve someone else's approval: saving the teen at Westside Market, promising Ruth a call, and finally blocking my mother's number. I underlined blocking because I realized that step wasn't cruelty, it was setting a boundary I wish someone had taught me years ago. When the clock struck 1, I closed my journal and whispered into the quiet, "This is my Christmas now." No one applauded. No one poured me more mashed potatoes, but I didn't need them. I had my own small ritual now: coffee, a chipped keychain, a taped snowman, proof that I could celebrate myself, even when everyone else walked out the door. I woke on December 26th to sunlight slicing through the blinds, cutting across that taped snowman like a spotlight on my newfound resolve. My apartment in Cleveland Heights felt different. Less like a holding cell for past failures and more like the backstage of my own life, where I finally got to step into the spotlight. The chipped Santa keychain sat on the dresser, shining against the wood grain, a constant reminder that I'd reclaimed my narrative. I brewed coffee in the chipped mug itself, the one Mom gave me last year, with grounds so strong they could strip paint. I sipped it slowly, tasting both the bitterness of yesterday's tears and the warmth of today's possibilities. Mid-morning, my phone buzzed, Dad calling. I stared at his number longer than I had at any other this week. He said he'd be free for brunch at Angelo's Deli in Little Italy, his treat. I'd always put off that visit, too anxious to talk about more than the weather. But today I accepted. At Angelo's, the aroma of baking bread and garlic wrapped around us. Dad looked smaller, frielier, bypass scars still visible under his collar. He reached for my hand before I could order, urging me to spill everything. I admitted how crushed I'd been, how ashamed I'd felt washing dishes instead of wearing a suit at our own holiday. I confessed my fear that I'd never be enough. He didn't offer empty apologies. Instead, he slid across the table a plain white envelope. A check. No strings attached, just to help me cover debts so you can breathe, he said. His eyes glistened, not with pride, but with relief that he'd finally done something right. I tore the seal and felt tears sting my cheeks. As I left, envelope in coat pocket, I glanced at Mayfield Road's bustling shops dressed for post-Christmas sales. I realized I wasn't just getting financial relief. I was being given permission to start over, to write a new chapter that didn't hinge on Mom or Eric's approval. That night, I sat at my mini kitchen table under the neon diner glow, the envelope open but untouched, and I wrote in my journal, "I forgive myself for needing forgiveness." I closed the chipped mug over the page like a lid on old regrets. In that quiet, I understood that forgiveness wasn't a gift so much as a tool, one I needed to use on myself before I could ever rebuild bridges I'd burned. And for the first time, I believed I could. I drove out to Lakeview Cemetery before dawn. The mist curled around the mausoleums like whispered prayers, and I thought of all the lives I'd touched this week. Some saved, some surrendered. My mind drifted back to that Detroit call, the shudder of the stretcher, the weight of a man slipping away despite my best efforts. I never let myself feel the loss. That felt too defeatist. I parked by the Garfield Memorial and slipped the chip keychain into my coat pocket under my heart. I wasn't going here to mourn anyone else. I was here to honor myself by facing my own ghosts. I found a marker for my mentor, Lieutenant Harris, who died of a heart attack 3 years ago. He'd taught me to breathe through chaos, to steady my hands when everything shook. I ran mine across the granite, imagining he'd scold me for letting family break me when I'd sworn to be unbreakable. I whispered, "I'm still here, Harris. I'm still standing." The twilight deepened as I left the cemetery and headed east towards Shaker Square, where an old bait shop paved the sidewalk with antique fishing lures. My ex-fiancée had once joked that I smelled like antiseptic and wet waders after a fishing trip. That memory hurt less now, like a scar that warmed in the sun. I stopped at a faded Benihana sign where they'd once celebrated my birthday with teppanyaki and cheap sake. I'd burned myself, literally, dashing under the grill to catch a flambe gone rogue, another clumsy me moment they'd laughed about behind my back. But today, I felt steadier. I bought a single rose from a street vendor and tucked it into my coat. It wasn't for anyone but me, a symbol that I could still be surprised by beauty, even bruised. By late afternoon, I made my way to Ruth's apartment on East 30th Street. She answered before I knocked, her frail figure framed in the doorway, confusion and delight mingling in her eyes. I handed her the rose. She smiled with a toothless grin that made her cheeks glow. I told her I'd call every week. No excuses, and she nodded, clutching my hand like I'd promised her the world. After I left, I sat on the stoop of her building, holding the last sliver of daylight. I realized I was building a new kind of family, one stitched together by choice, compassion, and shared vulnerabilities, not blood and expectations. That evening, back in my apartment, I placed the rose in a small glass of water on my dresser, right next to the chipped mug and the taped snowman. They formed a triangle of imperfection that somehow felt whole. I journaled one final thought before sleep claimed me. Maybe success isn't a suit or a ring. Maybe it's waking up and choosing kindness in spite of everything. I'd heard from Mom once, just a stiff text saying she missed me. I didn't reply. Instead, I found a booth at the corner alley, ordered black coffee and fries, and let my phone buzz unanswered. Around me, students hustled to winter classes, bundled in scarves of school colors I didn't recognize. I envied their certainty, exams, future plans, internships. My trajectory had been rerouted so many times I no longer knew the destination. Et miti panicked. What if I was defined only by tragedies saved and storms weathered? What if kindness was just another duty badge on my chest? My hands hovered over the phone. I pictured my mother alone at that clandestine table, smiling at Eric as I saved lives miles away. Part of me wanted to text back, begging sorry, while the rest of me refused to be prey again. Then I remembered Ruth's words, that no one visits if they don't remember. I pulled out my journal and wrote, "I will remember myself." I sketched a heart around the phrase and folded the page in my wallet. It felt less like a promise and more like a lifeline. On the 29th, I reported for a night shift on Lorraine Avenue in Ohio City. The city's pulse slowed after midnight, but emergencies never slept. By 2 a.m., I was driving a diabetic seizure call past the neon of Shuttered Hair Salon. The patient stabilized, and as I loaded her into the back, I realized I'd never let myself fully lean on anyone, friends, therapists, even dad. I'd been the rescuer, never the rescued. I parked under a flickering street lamp and broke down. I closed my eyes and let tears track through the grime on my cheek. Not because I was weak, but because I was finally letting the weight go. I whispered, "Help me carry this," not to a dispatcher, but to myself. When my relief arrived, I handed over the rig's keys and walked home across the frozen pavement. Each step crisp and deliberate. I didn't need to block Mom again. I just needed to stop hauling her expectations. At home, I rinsed the fries from my fingers, grabbed my wallet, and called my oldest friend in Akron, someone who knew the kid I was before the uniforms and broken hearts. I spoke without hesitation, letting the words spill. "I chose me." He laughed, the kind of laugh shared by people who survived the same storms. And for the first time since that Christmas betrayal, I felt the tide shift. I wasn't alone. I decided to clear out my phone's photo gallery, an archive clogged with images of past disappointments. The engagement ring I never gave, the freezing stretchers in Detroit, candid snapshots of family holidays where I forced a grin. I tapped delete on hundreds of pictures, watching them vanish like old ghosts. My thumb hovered over the last one, the Instagram story of that secret dinner, and I wiped it away too. In its place, an empty frame that felt like breathing room. I spent the afternoon driving along the Lake Erie shore, the wind whipping through my cracked windshield, carrying the brine of the water and the promise of something unfixed. I passed the old Coast Guard station at Edgewater Park, where tourists bundled in parkas snapped selfies. I felt neither invisible nor exposed. I simply felt myself, present, flawed, and alive. That evening, I restocked my apartment's kitchen cabinet. Coffee filters, emergency snacks, and a small stack of blank Christmas cards I found at a thrift store in Ohio City. Each card cost a quarter, but to me, they were priceless, a way to rewrite my own holiday. I chose 4 with winter landscapes, a lone oak under snow, children around a bonfire, a dog chasing footprints. I tucked them into a drawer labeled "Next Year," alongside a fresh pack of pens. Sometime after midnight, I paused when I noticed an unopened text from my brother, Mark Scene. He'd asked why I'd blocked him. I stared at the message and realized I didn't owe him an explanation. The betrayal wasn't in his promotion or her new engagement, but in the secret betrayal. The hidden conversations behind my back, the family that never asked if I was okay. I deleted his message. On New Year's Eve, I traded the sirens for a stroll through Coventry Village in Cleveland Heights. The shops were closing. A street musician played a melancholy tune on an upright piano in a cafe window. I paused, feeling the keys' resonance in my chest. I offered a few bills in the jar and watched him nod, an acknowledgement between strangers who understood loss without explanation. By midnight, I was back home, the chipped Santa mug filled with fresh coffee instead of eggnog. Its crack now a badge of survival. I looked at the quartet of blank cards and finally wrote one, to myself. Thank you for refusing to give up. I left it open on the mini kitchen counter, a mirror to my own persistence. As fireworks bloomed in distant skies over Cleveland, pops of light that felt less like celebrations and more like sighs of release, I realized that I'd turned the page on an old story. My family's betrayal had been the final punctuation, but it wasn't the end of my narrative. On January 1st, I swapped my red and white Santa keychain for a simple leather tag stamped with my initials. No more symbols handed down by others. I clipped it onto my uniform belt at Station 12 in Ohio City, where the janitor nodded approvingly. He'd seen me through rookie jitters and senior doubts. Today, his silent respect felt like a new kind of family. The first call of the year came from a collapsed jogger on the towpath trail near Tremont. I raced along the icy towpath, adrenaline pale against my resolve. I found her half frozen, shivering beneath her down jacket. As I wrapped her in blankets, I thought about all the frantic Christmas mornings I'd spent chasing alarms instead of opening presents. This quiet touch, steady breathing, was how I'd choose to remember the holidays from now on. Back at the station, I filled out my report and noticed the drawer labeled "Next Year." I pulled out one of the blank cards and wrote, "To my mother, may you learn that love isn't earned by perfection." I paused, pen in midair. Forgiveness wasn't just for me. Maybe it was for her too. I slid the card back into the drawer without addressing it. Some words are for planting, not mailing. Later, I laced up worn boots and walked down to Whiskey Island at dusk, where Lake Erie's waters met the Cuyahoga's mouth. Cargo lights from the flats glinted against the horizon, like distant beacons guiding something home. I let the wind strip away the last of my doubts. Somewhere in that roar, I heard my own heartbeat, not drowned out by family expectations or dispatch calls, but clear and insistent. I thought of Ruth waiting for my next call, Dad's check still tucked in my coat, and the 4 cards labeled next year that hung between hope and action. I realized that my family, blood, or chosen wasn't defined by holidays or hidden dinners, but by the everyday moments we choose to show up. I headed back inland, boots crunching across frozen grass, each step imprinting a promise. I will show up for myself. I will answer my own calls for help. And I will keep writing my story in the margins of every shift, every blank card, every chipped mug. Late morning, I drove south to the North Coast Harbor, where Lake Erie meets the city's heartbeat. The Great Lakes Science Center gleamed under the pale winter sun. I watched freighters inch past, their hulls heavy with grain bound for distant ports. In their slow, unstoppable drift, I saw my own progress. Not a parade of triumphs, but steady movement forward, even through ice. I thought of Eric and Mom, of the secret dinner table, and felt neither anger nor sorrow, just a quiet acceptance that their chapter closed itself. My ex-fiancée remained an echo in my phone. I hadn't reached out, nor did I plan to. Our stories diverged, and mine was now unfolding elsewhere. When dispatch called me back to Station 12, I climbed into the rig feeling lighter. On my belt, the leather tag with my initials rested beside the hollow where the Santa keychain once hung. I smiled, recalling Lieutenant Harris's words, "Carry only what you need." That evening, I met Dad at Angelo's Deli again, this time paying the bill. We shared a plate of rigatoni and garlic bread. No ceremonies, just 2 men content to sit in simple company. He didn't ask about Mom. I didn't offer. We spoke of trivial things, weather, the winter road salt shortage, the Browns' preseason, but in those small exchanges lay our healing. Back home, I finally filled the first card. To myself, may you remember this moment when doubt comes calling. I tucked it into the next year drawer with the others. The rest would wait, stories unwritten until I needed them. That night, I stood on my balcony overlooking the glittering city lights of Cleveland Heights. A lone owl hooted from a distant oak. In that hush, I felt the gratitude of survival and the freedom of choice. Tomorrow, I'd answer the next call, whatever it was. But for now, I simply breathed in the cold air, letting it fill me with resolve. And I knew, at last, that coming home to myself was the greatest gift I'd ever give.